Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show. Well, happy Tuesday there, folks. Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, and today we're going to be talking about evolution. We're going to be looking at a little bit different of a lens than you're used to. But before we get there, I want to go ahead and give a shout out to today's sponsor. At this point in time, I hope you guys know him, and I certainly hope you love him. It is the one and only Mikkel Thorpe from the Expat Money Show. Head over to briannicholsshow.com/expat. Why? Because you want to make sure that you can get your well, number one, I'm going to scroll to the top here. You're going to make sure you protect the money. There we go. You work so hard to earn from those ambulance-chasing lawyers, nefarious creditors, and greedy, unjust governments. Why? Because our good friend Mikkel Thorpe over at the Expat Money Show, he's bringing on hundreds of experts who are going through and helping you protect all that money that you've worked so hard to protect. And by the way, he helps people just like you who want to invest internationally. There we go. Secure second passports and residencies, eliminate the tax bill, and take advantage of offshore structures so you can travel the world freely and never have to worry about money again. And oh, by the way, the Expat Money Show is also hosting the Expat Money Summit taking place November 7th through November 11th, 5 days, 30 expert speakers. And just one of those keynote speakers happens to be the one and only Ron Paul. So head over to briannicholsshow.com/expat and get your free, yes, I said it one more time, free virtual summit tickets today. All right, folks. So on to the episode today. Yes, we're going to be talking about evolution, and helping me do that is Perry Marshall. Perry, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me on. Sounds like a great show you got.
Thank you for coming on the show, and I'm looking forward to this conversation because you just wrote a book, Evolution 2.0. We're digging into the topic of evolution. Now, yes, we do have some folks here who we talked about beforehand. They're probably more in the conservative Christian camp, and that's okay. Everybody here, this is a great conversation. Everybody needs to bring all, I think, voices and ideas to the table. Let's have that great conversation. In this case, I would love to hear more about Evolution 2.0. But first, Perry, do us a favor. Introduce yourself to the audience and what brought you into this world, looking at the world of evolution.
So I'm a business consultant and an entrepreneur, and I'm also an electrical engineer. And I'm a pastor's kid along with my brother. And I went into business and he went into ministry. And he was a missionary in China 18 years ago. And I went to see him, and he says, you know what, Perry, I don't believe any of this Christian stuff anymore, and I'm done, and I don't want to be a missionary anymore, and I'm going to go back to the United States in a month or two. And I'm like, what? And we got into this argument, and I said, Brian, look at the hand at the end of your arm. This is a nice piece of engineering, and I should know because I'm an engineer. You don't think this is an accumulation of random accidents, do you? He goes, hold on. And he just came right back with me, said, look, if you got 1 million falcons, all you need is a DNA copying error. And once in a while, that's going to make their eyes see better, and it's going to outhunt the other falcons. You don't need any designer. You just need enough time and chance, and it's going to happen. And I just kind of stopped, and I thought, well, I've never actually studied this topic of evolution that we're just arguing about right now. And on one hand, I know that a whole bunch of biologists would agree with him and not me, and they're probably not stupid people. So I probably need to take that into consideration. On the other hand, I thought about everything that I knew about engineering, and I couldn't think of anything I knew from 20 plus years of engineering that made what he said make sense. Like, well, copying errors? You're saying copying errors make better eyesight? Like, I can't think of anything I've ever learned that would back that up. So I made a decision right there in the moment. Dude, stop arguing with your brother. You're not going to change his mind, not today anyway. And you're just making your little vacation to China miserable. So how about when you go back home, you figure this out? Maybe the biologist knows something you don't. Maybe you know something the biologists don't know. But I said, I'm going to find out. And I was really serious. And I started buying books. Like, you can see them all. They're all over my office here. And man, it was way, 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 way more fascinating than I had ever suspected. And it was way more interesting than the normal argument was even considering. And so that's how Evolution 2.0 got started.
Wow, what a journey. Now, I too, by the way, I'm also a pastor's kid, fellow PK over here. So yeah, I was my wife and I were driving through rural Indiana, and I saw signs for Vacation Bible School, and I said, that brings back memories, sweet, sweet memories of Jonah and the whale. Yeah, good times. Also, Veggie Tales for anybody playing along in the home game. Good stuff there. Also, I played tuba, and back when I was in marching band, inevitably I'd get asked at least 2 or 3 times a parade, can you play the VeggieTales theme song? I was like, of course I can. So that was always a good time. But anyways, back to the conversation of evolution. So yeah, this is a conversation that took place not only, I think, with every kid who's likely gone through Vacation Bible School, Sunday school, or has at least been aware of the evolutionary versus the creator story. And this has been a very sensitive topic, I think, when you look at the way that it's been approached, because it's almost been like it's A or B, it's black or white, it's yes or no. There is no room for nuance. There is no room for digging into, well, maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe there's stuff that we can't explain, but we do see things happening in a very consistent manner. What were you uncovering, Perry, as you were walking through some things that maybe open your eyes?
So it took me about 2 weeks to figure out that if all you're going to do is go to Borders or Barnes and Noble or some bookstore and take the books that are sitting there on the shelf that are about the creation, intelligent design, evolution debate, you are not going to get the whole story. You're going to get polarized talking points where everybody's thing makes sense within their particular picture, but then if you step outside of that picture, there's a lot of stuff that they're not telling you. And so within a few weeks, I was going deep into science literature and peer-reviewed papers and actual research, rather than just taking the popular digested version of things. And it got more and more and more interesting, because what I found was the popular positions were all butchering the conversation, and they were leaving the most important stuff out. And I found that the truth was really somewhere in the middle. And it wasn't, I wouldn't even call it a compromise between the two. I would say that it was actually much more interesting than either side was even talking about. So for example, I found out that cells can rearrange and rewrite their own DNA in not just weeks or years, but literally hours. I found that every cell in existence, every cell in your body, has the ability to modify its own genetics. And that when you put, it could be corn plants, it could be bacteria, it could be viruses, it could be human beings. When you put organisms in stressful situations, they adapt with an incredible capacity that's beyond anything humans have ever engineered. And so I was like, why isn't anybody talking about this? Like, why did it really took me a couple of years to get to the treasure trove where, oh, dude, like, I can tell you where some serious bones are buried. And I said, we have to have a whole new conversation about this topic.
Yeah, well, okay, we're going to save, obviously, a lot of the good stuff for folks to actually go purchase the book, which you can go ahead and purchase over on Amazon. We'll make sure we include that link, by the way, folks, in the show notes. We'll touch on that at the end. But let's talk about some of the areas that you were surprised in terms of where people have been maybe trying to keep the conversation from actually being a conversation and rather present only one narrative over the other.
So one area that I thought was really interesting was the question, where did life come from in the first place? And so some people would say, well, God did it. It has information, it has intelligence, only an intelligent being can do that. And then on the other side, you have people say, well, there was a warm pond and a lucky lightning strike and a lucky RNA strand, and it started replicating, and voila, you've got a cell. Now, when you dig down into the origin of life question, what you'll quickly find out if you're reading anybody who's honest is that nobody really has any idea. And what I wanted to do was, rather than just say, oh, therefore we can't figure it out, God did it. I was never very fond of that approach because, okay, think about Isaac Newton sitting under the apple tree and the apple falls on his head. And, we've all heard that story of like, he said, well, something must have pulled that down. And maybe it's the same thing that keeps the moon in orbit. And he was right. And he discovered gravity. And if he'd sat there and said, well, God did it, we wouldn't have Isaac Newton, we wouldn't have gravity, we wouldn't have calculus, we wouldn't have modern physics, right? And like, so God did it is, in science, isn't really a very helpful answer. I started to see God's role in this as being almost like a North Star kind of thing. Like, we live in a divinely ordered universe, but the rest is for us to discover. And so I put together the world's largest science research prize for fundamental science. It's called the Evolution 2.0 Prize. And it's a search for the answer to the question, where did the genetic code came from? Because the genetic code is information, and information is a very different kind of thing than gravity or a steel ingot or a hunk of plastic. Information is immaterial. And so where did the instructions in the genetic code come from? You can't say, oh, well, evolution produced it, because you have to have a genetic code for evolution to happen in the first place. So there's a chicken and egg problem. And so I put together a group of private investors who put up $10 million. And we announced it 3 years ago at the Royal Society. And I have judges from Harvard, Oxford, and MIT. And every week I get emails from scientists who are seriously discussing this question with me about, where did the genetic code come from? Where did life come from? And I, rather than picking a side, I said, let's insist on empirical facts. You don't just get to tell a story. You've got to come with data and information.
So when you're having this conversation with the scientists, now this I'm sure opens up so many different conversations that you can go the rabbit hole of, whether you can go the creationist route. It could be any, name your religion, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. I mean, there's always some creationist story. There's also, which has become much more popular nowadays, like the ancient aliens theory, where we are the descendants of this greater being, which almost goes back to this coding, right? Where did the coding come from? And then there's the evolutionary conversation, which now, to your point, there is that question though, where does it come from? So now I have to ask, and I'm not sure this is in the book, but I don't want to do any spoiler alerts, but what's the conversations you've been getting? Where are scientists starting to lean more towards where the actual codes come from, or do we not have an answer yet?
So, well, we don't have an answer yet, but a conversation that's really opened up, especially in the last 5 years or so, is a conversation that I will label cognition. And intelligence could be a synonym for cognition, agency, consciousness, those could all be synonyms for cognition. But cognition is it's a very clean word. It's used very frequently in the scientific community. And for, I would say, 100 years, it was kind of taboo or frowned upon to treat life itself as though it is intrinsically intelligent and intentional. The story would always be more like, well, humans are intelligent and chimpanzees are sort of intelligent and your dog is a little intelligent, but we're not gonna treat individual cells or plants or bacteria like they're intelligent. But there's a fabulous TED Talk by Bonnie Bassler called How Bacteria Talk. Bacteria are intelligent. Bacteria have words like you and me and us and them, and they talk to each other. And like, when you get, like, ever had one of those like autumn days when it's really cold outside and you go out and you come back in and you're like, oh man, I don't know if I should have gone outside today. I'm coming down with something. Well, you didn't catch something when you went out. You didn't catch a cold or the flu when you went outside. It was in your system for weeks. And they were sitting there going, is it time yet? Is it time yet? Is it time yet? And while you were outside and your immune system was distracted, they go, okay, now's the time. And they attack. And all of a sudden, like, you get sick like within an hour or two. That's called quorum sensing. And a conversation that is opening up in biology now that wasn't going on a decade ago is that all cells and all living things have some level of cognition, and they're intelligent. And personally, I think in order to solve the origin of life problem, we're actually going to have to solve the consciousness problem.
Yep.
And the issue with consciousness is, honestly, nobody really knows what it is. Like I'm talking to you and I'm having an experience inside my head. And Brian, you're talking to me and you're having an experience inside your head. And so are the people listening. And nobody knows how to quantify that, how to reproduce it. Nobody knows how to create sentient beings. Nobody knows where consciousness comes from. But I believe that consciousness is fractal, and it goes down to the very lowest levels of life. And all of my study and reason, and I've been working on this 18 years. I think you have to solve the consciousness problem first to solve the coding and the life problem, because I think life is actually consciousness first, chemicals and code second, not the other way around. And that's a complete reversal of the standard story. In fact, I published a paper a year ago in Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology. It's called Biology Transcends the Limits of Computation. And what that paper says is that biology has gotten cause and effect backwards for 100 years. So, don't mean to offend anybody, but I think we've been barking up some wrong trees for a long time now.
That opens so many questions. And I think you're spot on, Perry, because the idea of consciousness, of cognition, it is so hard to define. And frankly, I don't think it is possible to define. I know there's been so many studies. I think there was one particular study where they actually measured the weight of somebody on their deathbed before and after they passed. And they noticed there was actually a weight of them that dissipated immediately after death. And there's the idea, is that the weight of consciousness, right? And there's so much to what is it? Is it energy? Is it is it something that we haven't even discovered yet? I mean, I know we're talking right now about the James Webb telescope that's out there, right? And all the new things it's going to be discovering. But like, is it possible that there is just something out there that makes consciousness, and yet we just can't put it into words yet? It hasn't. I don't want to say we haven't discovered it yet, but because we all know it's there, we just don't know how to verbalize what it is we're experiencing.
Well, I think at the very, very least, there is something akin to completely undiscovered law of physics that makes such things possible. I think there's kind of a war in science between people who insist that the current laws of physics as we know today are basically pretty close to the answer. And I think there's a whole bunch of other people who are saying, no, you are completely missing something very, very, very big. And that conversation constantly revolves around information, consciousness, agency. And I'll add a comment. So if you sort of like put on your Jordan Peterson hat, and people like him are always talking about, well, what is the symbolic meaning of a story, or what's the archetypical significance of a story? All of that is about symbolism. And if you go to look at my prize and what it's all about, it's looking for, where does the ability to assign meaning come from? Because like a letter in the genetic code, it's 3 codons together that mean an amino acid, and then you string some of those together, and those mean the building of a protein. And it's all about meaning. And all religious views, and like the whole kind of religious framework in general, has always been concerned with meaning and symbols. And the truth is you can't understand any of this without assigning meaning. It's just, I think a lot of people, they assign meaning and make assumptions without even realize what they're doing. And what the religious view does is it gives you for the tools for understanding what exactly that you're doing and realizing that you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to go back to really quick, and you mentioned this feud in science where there is those who seem to be eternally curious and those who are not. How huge is that right now in what we've seen over the past few years with the COVID conversation, with those who have been eternally curious in the conversation about the COVID pandemic, and those who are like, nope, settled science, anything else, you're a heretic. To fast forward, I mean, Dr. Bajan, when he was on the program, he was talking about how there's too many folks in academia who are afraid to utter the F word, freedom. They're afraid, right? Isn't that scary? And he says we need to have more of folks going around saying the F word, because at the end of the day, if you're not comfortable in being able to talk about these sometimes controversial and sometimes very humbling ideas, because frankly, it makes us have to acknowledge that there's a lot of stuff we don't know. I think, and Perry, I know we have to wrap because I just looked at time already, getting hard pressed here. But one of the things that it hits me when we see this in the political conversation is the arrogance of humans, and that we think we can have the answer for everything. And yet there is there's infinite amounts of stuff that we do not know, and we will never know. And yet we think we have the answers. It does baffle my mind sometimes that we can be so with our hubris and go out there with our ideas and think how confident we are when there is so much we don't know. But I'll get off my soapbox now. Perry, what would you say are some final thoughts here that you want to leave with the audience, particularly as it pertains to evolution? There it is, 2.0.
Brian, fairly early in my journey through Evolution 2.0, I came to a startling realization, which was fundamentalism is not a religion, it's a personality type. And you could be a fundamentalist atheist, you could be a fundamentalist evangelical Christian, you could be a fundamentalist Islam, you could be a fundamentalist anything, okay? And what a fundamentalist personality, and I'm not using the word in a complimentary way, okay? But at the root of it is an addiction to certainty. Like, I want to know the exact answer, and I am only comfortable with exact answers. Well, if you go deep enough in science, you will figure out that if what you want is exact answers and certainty, science is not a very good profession to be in. Because every 50 years, in any branch of science, something gets violently turned upside down, right? Like it happened with physics with E equals mc squared and relativity, and it didn't invalidate traditional physics, but it showed that it was very incomplete. And this always happens in science, okay? And I think there are a lot of sophomoric people in science who they try to present an appearance that we've got it all figured out, but you will always see the foundations crumbling beneath them. I'll introduce another word, mystic. And I don't mean mystic in a derogatory way. I mean mystic in the sense of a person who is comfortable with mystery and is able to embrace it and is actually in some ways more interested in questions than answers. And I think if you want to keep learning your whole entire life and you want to maintain your sense of wonder, you need to be a mystic.
Oh, amen. And you know what is great? Because we talk about sales and marketing here on the show quite often. What do we talk about makes a great salesperson, folks? Eternal curiosity. You have to be eternally curious about your customers. And by the way, Perry, I do want to go back to one thing you did bring up there. You're talking about isms not being necessarily a good thing. That just struck a chord. There's a very famous scene here in a very great movie that I think that summarizes that quite well. Take a listen.
It's not that I condone fascism, or any ism for that matter. Isms, in my opinion, are not good. A person should not believe in an ism. He should believe in himself. I quote John Lennon, "I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me." A good point there. After all, he was the walrus. I could be the walrus. I'd still have to bum rides off of people.
All right, isms are not a good thing, and as a matter of fact, yeah, you should believe in yourself. Perry Marshall, thank you for joining us. Where can folks go ahead and find you if they want to continue the conversation, but also if they want to go ahead and check out Evolution 2.0, where can they go ahead and snag that?
You can go to evo2.org, sign up. You get 3 free chapters of the book. You get on our email list and our podcast list, and the book's at amazon.com. So go to evo2.org, EVO2.org. And you can sign up right there on the homepage, and the adventure will begin. And I promise you, the rabbit hole goes very deep. In our world, we have very respectful conversations about the most important questions in the world, and they're fun, enjoyable, and they're for curious people. So really glad you had me on, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, Perry, thank you for joining us. And folks, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please do me a favor. Well, number one, go ahead and give it a share, because I think there's a lot of folks out there who want to hear this conversation. But number two, go ahead and reach out to Perry. Tell him that you heard him here on the Brian Nichols Show. I know all my guests love to hear from the audience, and especially when they're saying, hey, I really enjoyed not only your appearance, but then they continue the conversation, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate, enlighten, and inform. And that requires us to be, yes, eternally curious and go in and try to find some answers, even though we might not necessarily discover them. So with that being said, folks, if you enjoyed the episode, as I said, go ahead and give it a share. And by the way, I'll make it easy for you. If you want to go ahead and learn more about today's episode, click the artwork in your podcast catcher. It'll bring you right over to briannicholsshow.com, where you can find today's episode, the entirety of the transcript from today's episode. And oh, by the way, we have the video version of the program as well, folks. So if you have not checked that out yet, it's right there over at briannicholsshow.com. And when you head to YouTube, hit that subscribe button and little bell so you don't miss a single time we have an episode air. 5 days a week. How about that, folks? All right. With that being said, thank you for joining us on today's episode. It's Brian Nichols signing off for Perry Marshall. We'll see you tomorrow.
You're listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.